The dust of the Eurotas Valley hung in the still, hot air, a fine golden powder that coated everything and everyone. It got into the eyes of the 7-year-old boy, but he did not dare to blink away the grit. To flinch was to invite a blow. He stood naked, his small body shivering not from cold. The Laconian sun was relentless, but from a terror so profound it had hollowed him out. Before him, the other boys of his age, his pack, stood in the same wretched state. Behind them, their mothers, faces carved from the same stone as the Taygetus mountains, watched in absolute silence. Not a single woman wept. To weep would be to dishonor the son she had borne for the state. This was the day of the diamastigosis, the ritual whipping at the sanctuary of Artemis Orthia. But for this boy, Lysander, it was merely the latest and most public trial in a life that had ceased to be his own the moment the elders deemed him fit to live. 5 years prior, his fate had been sealed. He had not been present for the judgment, only felt its consequence in every breath he drew. After his birth, he had been bathed in wine, a test of strength for his infant constitution. Then he was taken not to his mother's arms, but to the Lesh, the meeting place of the elders. The old men, their bodies maps of scars, their eyes like chips of flint, had examined him. They looked for any hint of weakness, any deformity, any sign that he might not grow into a perfect instrument of war. Lysander had passed. He was whole, robust. The child who failed, he would learn later from hushed, grim conversations, was taken to the apothete, the place of rejection, a chasm on the slopes of Mount Taygetus. There was no room for sentiment, only for the cold calculus of Spartan survival. He was a citizen of Sparta only in potential. First, he must be unmade and remade in the city's iron image. His real life ended at 7. He was taken from his mother's house, from the warmth of his family's hearth, and plunged into the Agoge, the upbringing. The barracks were austere, cold in winter, stifling in summer. His first lesson was deprivation. His single garment, a coarse, red chitaniskos, was provided not for comfort, but for uniformity, and to teach endurance to heat and cold. It was never washed. Shoes were a luxury denied. His feet had to harden against every stone and thorn in the land. Food was infamous for its scarcity and wretchedness. The black broth of boiled pork, blood, and vinegar was a staple, its taste a punishment in itself. Hunger was a constant companion, a gnawing, disciplined tutor. The state provided just enough to stave off starvation, no more. To eat, one had to be cunning. Lysander learned to steal. Stealing was not merely tolerated in the Agoge. It was an essential part of the curriculum. But to be caught was a failure of skill, and the punishment was severe. Lysander's first foray into theft was for cheese from the altar of Artemis Orthia. He was quick, his small hands deft, but an older boy saw him. The beating was not for the theft, but for the clumsiness of being detected. He took the stripes without a sound. Crying out meant additional lashes and, worse, eternal shame. The greatest sin in this boy world was not dishonesty, but weakness. The culture of the pack was one of brutal hierarchy, enforced by the older boys, the iron, who had the right to command and punish the younger. It was a system designed to break familial bonds and replace them with loyalty to the pack, and ultimately to the phalanx. The training was ceaseless and varied. Grammata letters were taught, but sparingly, enough to convey a message or understand an order, not enough to foster dangerous philosophy. Music and dance were not arts for pleasure, but drills for war. They learned the war dances, the peerhitch, moving in perfect, synchronized rhythm with shield and spear, building the muscle memory for the deadly step of the phalanx. They were taught to speak laconically, brief, pithy, unambiguous. A waste of words was a waste of breath, and breath was needed for fighting. Their bodies were hardened through gymnastics, wrestling, and the panration, a no-holds-barred combat where only eye-gouging and biting were forbidden. And even those rules were often ignored in the heat of the fight. But the core of their education was the Krypteia, the secret service. This was the final, most terrifying phase of their training, shrouded in mystery and blood. In his late teens, Lysander, now hardened, scarred, and lethally proficient, was selected. He was sent out into the countryside with nothing but a dagger. His mission: to survive, unseen, and to kill. The targets were the Helots, the enslaved Messenian population that outnumbered the Spartans 10-1, and worked the lands that fed the warrior elite. The Helots were the engine of Spartan society and its greatest fear. The Krypteia was a tool of terror, a way to cull the strongest and most rebellious among them, and to inure young Spartans to the act of murder. Lysander moved by night, a ghost in the olive groves. He remembered the face of the first Helot he killed, a strong man found walking a road after curfew. There was no fight, just a swift, silent knife from the shadows. The man's eyes, wide with surprise, then emptying, haunted Lysander not with guilt, but with a cold understanding. This was the logic of his world. To ensure the survival of the few, the many must live in terror. He was no longer a boy. He was a function of the state, a sharpened tool. At 20, having survived the 13-year crucible, Lysander stood again before the assembly. He was granted his citizenship, his allotment of land worked by Helots, and his place in a syssitia, a military dining mess. His life was still not his own. He was required to eat every meal with his 15 messmates, contributing a fixed portion of barley, wine, cheese, and figs from his estate. Here, conversation was monitored. To speak foolishly was to be ridiculed. To fail to contribute one's share was to risk expulsion from the mess, and with it, the loss of citizenship. Even marriage was subordinated to the state. Lysander was assigned a wife, the sister of a messmate. Their meetings were clandestine, furtive. He would slip away from the barracks at night, return before dawn. The goal was not companionship, but procreation, producing more sons for the Agoge. His wife, raised in her own parallel system of rigorous physical training and devotion to the state, understood her duty as clearly as he understood his. Her pride was to be the mother of warriors, her shame to bear a weakling. The purpose of this entire, terrifying machine revealed itself on the battlefield. Lysander, now in his prime, stood in the front line of the phalanx at the Battle of Leuctra. The Thebans were a new kind of enemy, innovative, deep. The Spartan line advanced with the discipline drilled into them since childhood, an unbreakable wall of bronze and flesh, moving as one organism. The music of war was not the scream of berserkers, but the deep chant of the paean, the rhythmic crunch of hobnailed sandals on earth, the unified clatter of Aspi's shields locking together. In that moment, the hunger, the beatings, the thefts, the murders in the dark, all of it coalesced into a single, unthinking purpose. The man to his left was his syssitia messmate, the man to his right his agile brother. They did not fight for glory or plunder, but for the man next to them. To break rank was to betray everyone you had ever known, every bond forged in the crucible of shared suffering. The system had eradicated the individual. Only the hoplite remained. Sparta did not fall at Leuctra, though the myth of its invincibility did. Lysander survived, carrying the body of his messmate from the field. In his later years, as Sparta's power waned, he would watch new classes of boys go through the Agoge. The world was changing. Other Greek states, with their philosophers, their artists, their sailors and traders, were adapting. Sparta could not. Its system was too perfect, too total. It had created the ultimate soldier, but at the cost of creating little else. It was a society that had chosen to be a single, perfect, and utterly rigid weapon. When the world moved beyond the need for that specific weapon, it had nothing else to offer. The barracks, the starvation, the ritual whippings, the secret murders, all of it was designed to produce a single, fleeting moment of perfection in the battle line, and for centuries it worked. But as Lysander, old and scarred, looked out at the diminishing numbers of Spartan youth, he understood the fatal flaw. The forge that created the unbreakable sword also made it brittle. It could not bend, and so, in the end, it would have to break. The very system that gave Sparta its fearsome strength contained the seeds of its own extinction, a monument not to the glory of man, but to the terrifying price of absolute order.